Well, today it's a testing time for Philip and Andrew, two of his students, his disciples. And of course, you will already have guessed that the same test that Philip goes through is the test that you will go through, is the test that I will go through, the same test that Andrew goes through, and more than once. We'll go through this test quite a few times. And a big part of our life is this particular lesson. You know, I mentioned last week that Jesus takes everyday challenges, everyday problems and confusions, and uses these events in our lives. I'm not necessarily convinced that God brings events to us or things happen to us in that way. I think that life has a way of presenting challenges and dilemmas and confusions, and God uses that to teach us, show us something about ourselves, something about God. So in this particular passage, we're in John chapter 6. Jesus takes a problem, but by the end of the lesson, Philip has a more accurate understanding of God and a more accurate understanding of himself. And I think that's true of Andrew, and I think that's true of all the students, all the disciples. That's sort of the way it seems to work in our spiritual lives. The more we understand ourselves, the more we understand God. The two go hand in hand. Self-knowledge and God knowledge seems to be intertwined in many ways. So if you've had a trying week, or you feel pushed to your limits in some way, or you feel angry or frustrated about something, again, I mentioned this last week, nothing in our life is wasted as far as God's concerned. Now, for us, we might think that lots of things are a waste of time. It's like, what can I learn from this? Nothing. But nothing seems to be wasted as far as God's concerned. So Jesus in this passage takes Philip's resistance, and Philip's energy and his attitude is, there's absolutely nothing we can do to change this situation. That's where Philip is coming from. I don't know what you're thinking, Jesus, but there's absolutely nothing we can do here. There's certainly nothing I can do to help this situation. So this is where Philip is coming from. And Jesus would say, really, Philip? Are things pretty impossible? You're thinking there's nothing we can do about this? No, there's nothing we can do about it. So that's where we're going with this. Everyday events or long-standing trials can show us quite a bit about ourselves. And it's always worth noting how we respond when we're blocked in some way. Any kind of block shows us a lot about ourselves, or you're opposed in some way, or someone's angry at you. That's another opportunity that can show us things about ourselves. Or someone's disappointed in you. All sorts of things that can show us too. So testing times. So the text is, actually I think we've all gone through testing times when I think about it this last year. I mean, who hasn't gone through a time of testing in the last year, the world over? And of course some of us, it's been a lot harder than others. Some of us have fared quite well, but whatever our experience has been, I mean, it certainly hasn't been the easiest of years, especially at the front end. I remember at the front end of our shelter in place, it was like, boy, are we going to survive this, So, and even for those of us who, sheltered in place well, because I have a number of friends who sheltered in place very well, especially all the creative ones. They like that time for some peace and quiet and reflection. But, you know, even at the beginning of our shelter in place, it was a pretty threatening time. So, back to the text. Haven't even started with it. John 6. This is very similar to last week's. This is a different angle now. Last week, for those of you who joined me last week, Jesus was going through a difficult time last week because John the Baptist, his cousin, had just been executed by Herod. So he is going through a lot of grief. The disciples, we looked at this last week too, had just sort of gone out on their own and had started their own outreach time, their own teaching time. They're at a point in their internship with Jesus that they can go out and try things themselves, which is always the idea. They only had 3 years with Jesus. So now they're going and they're going off on their own and trying out their own ministry. They come back really tired and Jesus says, we need to find a deserted place. Remember we looked at that last week? We've got to go away and find a deserted place. They get on the boat and they have some time to themselves. They're all exhausted and tired. I'm picking up the story from here. They don't have that much time to themselves because when they dock the boat on the shore, there is a crowd of people waiting for them. Jesus looks at the crowd. He sees that they're like sheep without a shepherd. He spends the entire day teaching them. Again, we looked at that last week. Won't go into it now. After the day of teaching, it's late, and of course everyone is tired and hungry, and they are quite far away from the nearest town. And this is where the conversation begins with Philip. So again, he's taken common everyday challenges. And if we back up and pay attention, they reveal something about ourselves. I'm looking at the example of Philip here. A lot of stress and a lot of tension comes in our lives because the bottom line is we're worried that we're not going to get what we need. We're worried that things are not going to work out the way that we hope they'll work out. What if I don't get this? What if I don't have enough? All these things really common. So he's sitting down with Philip's test. There's thousands of hungry people around him. Jesus says, verse 5, Philip, where are we going to buy bread for these people? In other words, what are we going to do here? It's late. They're hungry. We're miles away from anywhere. Practical Philip answers, well, 6 months' wages wouldn't even buy them a bite. Meaning, there's nothing we can do about that. We don't have the resources. There's no point in even having this conversation. We don't have the resources. We don't have what it takes. Which, on some level, is a perfectly legitimate answer because what Philip is doing is what we all do. It's cognitive problem solving. So Philip's looking on at a situation and he's saying, this is impractical. It's not going to happen. Now here's the tricky thing in the spiritual life. There is a place for cognitive problem solving. It is absolutely necessary. We cannot survive well in this world without it. It is an extremely important skill. Absolutely necessary for survival. Most of us live on this level, but the spiritual life or Jesus' wisdom offers a lot more. So on one level, this is how we all live, right? We analyze the problem. In this case, there's thousands of hungry people. We analyze the problem. We try out different scenarios in our head. We think about our resources. We think about how we can fix things. We think how we can problem solve. And then we choose something to do. And then that's normal and there's nothing wrong with that. However, Jesus would say it's a completely inadequate way to live life. Now, that's kind of shocking at first, when you first hear that, because it's like, well, what else is there? Because what Jesus teaches is that logic and cognitive problem solving is just one facet of the diamond. It's just one facet. So if you're living your life thinking things through, which works obviously at some level, Jesus would say you need to know that's one facet of the diamond. So there's a whole other world waiting to be discovered. Or not, right? Or not. Andrew, another disciple, says, well, there's a boy with a couple of fish here and some barley loaves, but what is that among so many? Now, there's different ways of hearing that and understanding that. I think he's sort of in agreement with Peter. It's like, well, we do have this little bit, but it's not enough. I think that's what he's meaning. Again, it's practical. We just don't have the resources, Jesus. I know they're hungry. I know what they need, but we just don't. We're too limited. So the test that both these disciples are going through, the test has shown that these disciples believe that everything is up to them. It's that attitude, well, if I don't do it, it's not going to get done. And a lot of us live life on this level. Who's going to do it if I don't do it? Who's going to take care of the situation if I don't take care of the situation? Of course I have to do it. Let's be practical here. This is a really tricky balance because if we live life solely on that level, and I happen to be a very practical, well-organized person, I completely get this. If we live solely on this level, we can miss so many opportunities. We can miss so much. We limit ourselves so much. Look what Jesus says in reply to Andrew and Philip. He says, have the people sit down. Now he knows what he's going to do. He's going to provide, he's going to feed them, he's going to take the bread, he's going to take the fish, he's going to hand them out, and there's going to be enough for everyone. He knows he's going to do this. But before he does it, he wants Philip and he wants Andrew to understand something. He says, have the people sit down. Now it's a simple line, but it's worth just reflecting on. Verse 10. It's like, get ready for me to do something, people. Get ready for me to do something, students. Start getting organized. Have them sit down. Have them get ready to receive something from me. I'm going to do something. Anticipate me doing something here. Move ahead. What? In trust that I'm going to do something here. So the disciples instruct the people to sit down and eat and get ready to eat. Now there's no food yet, but the disciples instruct the people to sit down and get ready to eat. So if you had been there that day and someone had said, okay, well, we'll sit down and we'll get ready, but where's the food? I don't see any food trucks here. The disciples wouldn't have been able to point to the food truck, in other words. There's nothing there, right? So if you come across a situation and in yourself you know you really don't have all that it takes to accomplish this task, that's where these disciples, that's what they're experiencing at this point. I don't know exactly how this is all going to work out. Jesus said we have to get ready to eat. So how is this going to work then, disciples? Philip, what are you thinking here? I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. Jesus said, sit down. I'm passing on. I think he's going to do something. Well, what is he going to do? I have no idea. I've never seen this before. I don't know. I've never been in this place before. That's where these disciples are coming from. So it's when you're in this when you're in this place in your life where you're looking to God to help you and you're relying on God to come through because you really don't have a backup plan. That's where these disciples are. It's, you know that if God doesn't come through and help in some way, you're going to be in trouble because you don't have an answer. You can't take bread and fish out the air, right? You can't do that. But the disciples, and I noticed this, it's kind of a subtle sort of teaching, but they go ahead and they take the action. So they do have a sort of a forward movement here. They're not just sitting passively saying, oh, Jesus will do something, it's okay. No. They're getting ready. They're anticipating. They're moving ahead. They're having the people sit down. You see that? They're not just sitting back saying, I don't know what's going to happen, he'll do it. No, they're participating in it too. It's a different kind of moving ahead when you're dependent on God though. It's an entirely different kind of moving ahead. It's like there's a great line in Isaiah. I think about it a lot. God will make a way where there is no way. The only time that promise comes in handy is when you're pushing the limits and you're living on the edge of faith. If you're not pushing the limits, the promise means nothing. So in this passage, Jesus has the people sit down. The disciples have the people sit down. Jesus takes the bread, he takes the fish, he begins to distribute it. Everyone has enough, there's leftovers. Won't go into that just now, we've discussed that in the past, and there's a lot there, but Philip and Andrew, it's like, are you paying attention here? Because there's more than enough to feed everyone. Remember, you were the ones who said, there's absolutely nothing we can do here. And you've just distributed bread for thousands of people. Okay, so that means that it wasn't just you doing this. There's a point where you can rely too heavily upon yourself in the life of the Spirit. There's a point where you can rely too heavily on yourself. Jesus is saying, sometimes you can't figure things out. Sometimes it's not really all up to you. The spiritual discernment is, when is it up to you and when is it not up to you? Can you discern the difference? Do you know when only God can provide? Do you know when? The old word is provision, that whole idea of God providing. It's kind of a huge leap of faith, really, because when these disciples had the people sit down, there's no proof, there's no guarantee. We don't know, we've never done this before. That's a big piece of moving ahead in faith. It's looking at impossible things, seeing that they're impossible in some way, but there's also an openness and an expectation and a trust. Now, you have to get God's nudge before you move ahead in this way. You have to have a sense of direction. You can't choose the direction and then say, okay, God's going to provide. You got to get the sense of direction. You've got to get the right okay to move ahead. And then this sort of comes together for you, right? God's the one behind it, pushing you toward taking that particular direction. So for Philip, it's like, Philip, it's not all up to you. Andrew, it's not all up to you. If it had been up to Andrew and Philip, everyone would have been sent home that night. If it had been up to Andrew and Philip, it's like, sorry everyone, it's late, we've had a long day teaching, there's a great Five Guys burgers a couple miles down the road, see you tomorrow, bye, and that would have been it. The deeper lesson would never have been learned, the deeper lesson being, Sometimes you can't do it by yourself, and only God can provide. Only God can make a way where there is no way. That happens in life quite frequently. If you're not tuned into that, you're going to be missing a lot of feeding of the 5,000s, if you know what I mean, right? You're going to be missing a lot of it. No, I was thinking about this teaching, and I was so fortunate very early on. I'm still learning this, by the way. It's not like I've got this all down pat, but I did remember when I was looking at this text, I was really fortunate. This was one of my very first early teachings that I received. It made a huge difference in the direction of my life. A huge difference. It directed me to go to college. It directed me to come to the USA, to go to graduate school, to go to California. There were so many obstacles. I'm not even going to go into any of them. Any step taken by itself, had you known the obstacles, you'd have said, there's no way. There's no way, you can't do that. There was so many obstacles, there was so many blocks to any of these things happening. It would have been so easy at any point to say, oh, you just give up. You know, I mean, it's too hard. You don't have all what you need. There's so many hoops to jump through to get what you want. It's just too hard. Take another path. It's like Philip, you know, I can't think my way out of this. And it's like God was saying to me, no, you can't. No, you can't. So early on, you better learn about Jehovah Jireh. Now, Jehovah Jireh, which is Hebrew for God provides, one of the first names of God in Genesis, Jehovah Jireh. So interesting that right in the first book of the scripture, the lesson, God provides. Learn it. It's like one, you know, to think our way through life and to rely on our own intellect and rely on our own smarts, rely on our own planning, rely on our own organizational skills. And if you're like me, you'll be pretty good at that kind of stuff. It is absolutely inadequate, Jesus would say. It is absolutely not enough. For the spiritual life, you have to learn what is your part to do and what is God's part. And then when it's God's part, stand back. Seriously, you'll see the sea parted. You'll see the seas will part. Things will happen that there's no other explanation for. Provision will come. I think that's the lesson, one of the lessons in this text this morning. I think that's the heart cry. That's the lesson that Philip had to learn, that Andrew had to learn, that we have to learn. God, show me. Show me, well, you'll already know where you need to where you need to trust that God will meet you. Because the heart has a way of, you know, everything bubbles to the surface, all our needs, right? When we hear these teachings, sort of our needs bubble to the surface, and it's like the Spirit of God saying, yeah, this is the area I'm going to show you. Jehovah Jireh, I will provide. Stand back, and see what I will do. It's a great promise. Amen.